Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this live AMA on defining AI boundaries with data sensitivity with Microsoft Purview. As AI becomes embedded in our day-to-day work, traditional data security models break down. Copilots and agents can now search, summarize, and recombine information at machine speed, creating new exposure paths for sensitive data, even when nothing is formally shared or exfiltrated. In this session, we'll explain why data sensitivity, instead of the data location, is now the true security boundary and what that means for protecting information in the age of AI. We'll talk through how organizations can establish a shared understanding of what data is sensitive and use that sensitivity to convert into labels that consistently define how that data should be handled and automatically enforce protections wherever the data is created or used, including in AI experiences. We'll then close with a live AMA where you can bring real-world questions about securing Copilot and agents, scaling classification and labeling, and turning sensitivity into consistent, enforceable controls with Microsoft Purview. I'm Trey McConnell, and I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager on the Microsoft team. Alongside me today is Saracen. Hi, Saracen.
Hi, Trey. How's it going? Hi.
Good. You want to
Hi,
do a
everyone.
quick intro?
Yeah, of course. So, hey, everyone. I'm Sarah Shane. I'm so excited to be here today to talk to you about how we're really redefining the way that we're talking about AI with data sensitivity. I'm on the product. I'm a senior product manager on the Microsoft Purview information protection and data loss prevention teams, and we've been doing a lot of work with the integrations with AI and how we can kind of move forward and have those conversations. So we're very excited here to really have this conversation and show you what we've been working on and how to really change the way that we're talking about AI today with data sensitivity. So I'm very excited to be here.
Thanks, Saracen. We're looking forward to walking all of you through defining AI boundaries with data sensitivity today. We'll start off with a presentation by Saracen, and then we'll have a live AMA where we'll be answering your questions live. So if you're watching this live and you have any questions about any of the features we're covering, go to the link shown below to ask us your questions on the Microsoft Tech Community website. You'll have to log in or create an account. Then you can submit questions by submitting them as a comment on the Tech Community page. So now let's go ahead and get started. Saracen, take it away.
Let's go ahead and get started. Have some good content here today with what I really wanted to show you all. So first of all, of course, welcome to our session on defining the AI boundaries with data sensitivity. Really, the next step is to kind of go forward and see how we can change the conversation, right? So the data security problem that we've been really focusing on over the last few years, maybe even a decade or so, depending on where you are in your journey, has now really gone through a massive change. It's being seen in a different way. And that's because of the way that we're now incorporating AI. The AI transformation is, of course, happening, right? It's moving at a rate that is extremely fast. It's accelerating in a way that when you're creating the data itself, your environment is changing. The way that you're handling the data itself, how it's accessing everything is changing the second that it's created, right? And so within the time frame, almost daily, you're having almost 400 million terabytes of data that's being created, and that's a lot of data that's taking place, and that's within individual environments. And as you're going through the different interactions, it's just changing. And so because of that, the way that we've perceived it for the last decade or years, depending on where you are, like I said before, it's now dynamic, right? It's always in motion, which in the past, like, oh, data in motion is mainly when you're sending it out, or it's in transit, right? But that is different in the way that we're looking at it in this day. It's just the way that AI is transforming that overall process itself. And we have to get on board with it, otherwise we'll be left behind on how we're, really handling that self. And so moving forward on, the traditional data security models that most of us are used to really going through and having, right? You have AI that's acting and behaving across so many different data sets in your environment. It's massive amounts of data. It's not just the data that you're creating. It's just anything that can be touched. AI is going through and really impacting that itself, right? It's summarizing your information. It's going through, it's recombining the information. It's generating things. It's showing you what's in your environment that you may not have had access to before. You may not have known that it was there, right? And again, it's acting on the fact, it's using the interactor, the user's permissions to access some of the content, especially at the enterprise level. So when you have the users going through this process, there could have been a file or there could have been some data that years ago they had access to and they still have access to, but they didn't know that they have access. So you're resurfacing that, right? And it's popping up now without it being copied or moved, modified, depending on how you see it. It's presenting itself in a way that can, again, it's not the traditional way that we've done before. And so the real key takeaway from this page is to understand that if you really don't know where your data is or how sensitive it is, let's go back to that, how sensitive your data is or what's important to you, you can't secure it. And if you can't secure it, you can't really enable safe AI in your environment or handle it safely in that case. So it's important to make sure that we have that understanding as we kind of move forward, because we're going to be doing a mind shift and a change in the way that we're handling it too, right? And so having the ability to really know this data and have the sensitivity of it or understand its impact to your organization, right? And understanding those steps is the best way that you can go through and prevent the unintended exposure through the use of AI. Because, if we're all being realistic here, AI is here now and it's just going to keep moving forward with what we do. And we need to make sure that we can handle it safely and we don't have any additional vulnerabilities that we're introducing to our environment because we didn't have the understanding of that mindset change for that matter. And so kind of moving forward, how do we go through this process, right? So there's a data first foundation that we're going to recommend. And it's part of how you're really changing the process, right? So to securely adapt AI, your organizations must, right? Of course, like I said already, you have to know what sensitive data you have, right? If you know what sensitive data you have, you kind of move forward and be able to really take the protection that you're trying to embed or create and be able to put that in that data, the sensitive data in your environment. And while you're going through the process, you've identified it, you've embedded the protection to those files, to the data itself, because it could be anything else besides just files, right? The next step is to really understand, well, how do you take the protection and really start enforcing the protection across all your users, and then of course, because you're doing the user level, your AI environment too. And then of course, as you're going through, it's to continuously evaluate and improve your posture, because it's not a one-time thing. Like I said before, now data is constantly in motion now. And so to have the understanding of it, building in the protection, enforcing it, it's something that needs to constantly be evaluated because your data is going to be changing all the time. And depending on the users you have in your environment, it's going to be a different way of looking at that as well. And so as you kind of move forward with the next steps, it's to really understand. So your AI data security journey is something that needs to be a unified approach. Because if you don't have that unified approach to really secure your data and you have that process set up, you're going to be playing catch up. And the goal is right now that we're already playing somewhat of a level of catch up as you have the new data, the new AI models populating, but you shouldn't have to play catch up with your security and identifying the information itself, especially if you have the right mindset at the beginning there too. So moving forward, the first step that you do is of course data classification. Within our Purview stack, we have the our information protection aspects where we can jump in. We have the ability where you can discover and understand your data sensitivity, right? So having this as that step one is critical because it helps you identify what is important in your environment and how you can really take those steps to ensure that you know what is there at that time, right? So let's think about this. You have an AI driven environment, right? And then you have so many different types of data sets there. If you have inconsistent sensitivity definitions, it's really just going to create a real set of risk in your environment. So what you need to do now is figure out a way that you can protect that. If you don't do it, then you're getting the risks of AI being able to access data that was never classified, right? Classified can be conceived in two different ways, right? It's really you trying to understand how that data needs to be handled itself. If you don't have it at a consistent level, then you're also producing the risk that your policies aren't going to behave consistently either. So if you're creating policies and you don't have, you don't know what's important, you haven't classified it, then you're going to have additional issues with that. And then your security teams will come in and it's that enforcement that cannot be really put into place, and you can't have full confidence that enforcement's around your entire environment, right? And then that then goes into from security to compliance, which I know are pretty, they work in parallel, and they have a lot of intersections in their work too. But then you won't be able to really prove the intent. You won't be able to see where the process is going to be going there too. And so by having the data classification, what you're really doing is getting this unified level of understanding, right? Being able to understand what's in your environment. You have that consistent understanding of the data that's sensitive. It's you know that everything, and I'll just use an example, right? Anything with a social security number is, say, confidential. You identify that, you know the locations, you know what's happening, then you know that any handling of it needs to be, certain people that can handle it and be able to, kind of move forward with that too. And as you have that identified, as you go through, now I really can't see any scenario where a social security number won't be sensitive. But again, it's just the example that I used. And if you have a specific ID number for a form or file, then that could change later on. So if you have the continuing of your evaluation after you identify it, then you're almost guaranteeing it to yourself that the information is always going to be, the most fresh version of the data classification that you have in your environment. So to build on top of that, it's important to note that you've gone through, you've now identified how sensitive your data is or what information or data in your environment is sensitive. It makes it a lot easier at this point to then go through and really be able to apply the sensitivity labels on top of it as well. And so kind of going through with what we're recommending, talking with, our products and having the conversation in this environment is to really, identify, how is Purview establishing this like trusted sense of understanding of sensitivity, right? We have so many different combinations of our classification techniques, right? We have pattern based, we have, trainable classifiers. We can actually go through and, train a classifier based off of forms that you may have or something in your environment that's specific to your organization that's not easily just created from a pattern, but you can actually just go through and upload those files. We have exact data matching. So if you have medical record numbers or you have a specific student ID numbers that really cannot be sent to wherever it is that you're going, there are different ways of kind of going through. You can do a combination of these. You can do just one or the other. It's really, we have several different methods where you can go through and classify. And then of course, what we're asked also is, how do you scan this data? Where can it be scanned? And it's important to note that with Microsoft Purview, we're not just scanning Microsoft 365 data, right? We have, of course, we have our endpoints, we have on-premises, we have also selected M365 workloads as well. We have things that we can do with, with certain, SV buckets. We extend it outside of just our product set to make sure, because we understand that we have a robust environment and, we have many customers who use, multiple different stacks and multiple different vendors too. So we want to make sure that that process is set up there. And then what's important to take away from this page here itself is also that every time a file is created, accessed, or modified, it's getting reclassified automatically again, right? So classification is really, again, this is the key takeaway here, how Purview is maintaining a living understanding of what data really matters. And this is not just for security, but it's mainly for that AI risk itself too. So we've gone through, we've classified the data, we've identified what's important in our environment, right? The next point is to talk about being able to label that data, add that label on top of it, because what's going to do then is you're going to take that sensitivity that you've identified to your data and then formulate it to become data handling guidance. So what that really means is then you can really use almost instructions like, hey, this is how this can be handled in the environment. And this is how we need to take it to the next few steps of what we're really going to be doing, right? So you label is the additional layer of protection, layer of control that you're adding to your data that you've classified in your environment. And so just by understanding the sensitivity, like I was mentioning, just by understanding this is important, it's just not enough, especially not in this landscape anymore, right? The way that it's used, knowing what's important in your environment, that's not how it's going to be changing it, right? It's the human interpretation that's not being scaled going to the AI-driven systems. Just because you know that it's a social security number doesn't mean that if you don't have anything set up against it with policies or even labels, your AI is going to do anything else. AI is just treating it based off of the access you have and interacting with it based off of that. So if you don't have any additional layers on top of it, there's going to be, that limitation becomes even louder too. So what that happens with the reality in this case is we have security controls, we have all these AI systems. They need these explicit instructions, right? They're learning, it is artificial intelligence, they're learning, but those instructions are what's going to make that be a better experience for your environment itself, right? So without having these explicit instructions, you're not going to have that consistent enforcement. And then, of course, you're going to have the issue of oversharing that comes here. So if you understand the risk, but you don't have any enforcement, you're not reducing the risk. You're just aware that there's a risk at that time. But if you have a risk, the goal is to then, of course, enforce the things you need to do to actually reduce it, right? And so now let's take a look at labels and taking the way that we take that understanding and turn it into different action. How do we then add on to it, right? So what are labels? So one thing that I really want to hammer down here is that sensitivity labels, they're not just tags or just metadata. You're not just tagging information in your environment in this case. They are now, you're viewing it as a way that it's a machine readable instruction that you're adding to that data itself. So then your systems will know how to handle it, right? The labels are persistent and they travel with the data if when you're doing things like encryption. If you have specific users that can only access that labeled asset, then it's going to be traveling with it and kind of moving forward. And then AI is also going to then be partaking with that overall, right? So then let's take a look at what these labels enable, right? So you have, of course, how the systems now know how the data is going to be handled. And it's going to be read the exact same way depending on where you're going in the data, your data estate. And then, of course, your security controls or the AI systems that you're using are going to now respond consistently and automatically, right? So you basically with the label, you are, if you have an encryption set up here, you're going to have one instruction and it's going to be consistent and it's going to be an automatic interpretation, which will then lead to enforcement and therefore reducing the risk that you have. Now, how does this work in practice, right? Excuse me. So let's take a look. So in this example, we're going to take an example of just any sensitive data here, right? Fill in the blank of what you want to use. It's been identified in your environment. It's been labeled as highly confidential or the highest tier of a label that you have in your environment, right? That has encryption built into it with what can be done, how it can be accessed. It can be only accessed by, say, a specific user group, whatever it is that you've now built into it, right? And then that label is going to then instruct downstream systems really how to respond and how to work with that, right? So then the outcome becomes that your AI tools are going to now respect the instruction, especially at the enterprise level, right? You don't have the ability for, kind of reuse all that's happening with it is that it's respecting the instruction that you have here, right? And then also the sharing and access are then restricted automatically because you've already identified who's allowed to access it based off the encryption that you set up in this label, right? And then that protection will then stay consistent across your overall ecosystem. You're starting out with you're classifying more, right? Then you label more, therefore you protect more. And then all that comes back down to being able to reduce your AI oversharing. And that's a huge way of taking that sensitive data in your environment and building it in because your AI is going to go through and have access to it. Now let's take a step back here and then focus on step 3 here, right? Of just overall protection. This is something that's enforced automatically, right? It's enforced automatically at scale. It's something that we're trying to do that avoids, the administrator and the users from going through and needing to do additional steps to really do manual enforcement, right? It's automatic for that part. So now let's take a look into the way that enforcement works, right? So you have how protection is applied. Like I mentioned a little bit before, you have the sensitivity labels. You have the sensitivity labels, There are so many different ways that you can handle it, right? You have to handle it with encryption, you have with DLP policies. There are many different levels that you can just add in layers and build on top of it, right? So those, as we said before, they are the caring handling instructions that go along with the data. Then these supported systems are going to read the same instruction and kind of move forward, and then have the additional protections and capabilities exist, right? So if you need Copilot when you're doing any interaction and you're asking them to do something with going into information that they shouldn't be able to, if the permissions already applied, then Copilot's not going to be able to do that. And so the reason why this matters is now it's more scalable. Organizations have so many different files, so many different assets in their environment. You don't want to be manually going through and trying to double check it. But if you have the protection already set up in place, and we have a lot of great guidance out there on how to do like a scalable labeling transition in your environment too, it takes away the manual effort significantly, and that's where we're trying to move forward to ensure that you have that lower level of risk, so that your environment can be moving forward. And then of course, as you have less manual effort, it's a more predictable protection that you can then have when your data is moved, it's reused, it's recreated, you're generating things, you're summarizing all the different aspects there, right? And so taking that over, you've identified your information, you've added a label, then you're adding the enforcement with the protection, right? We come down to our steps, a step 4 and 5 here, where you're observing and improving. What that really means is then you're you're looking at the specific activity explorers, seeing what's happening, seeing what interactions are taking place, right? What is the baseline in your environment, what the users are doing and how they are learning, how the system's learning, and then take those steps and fine tune it, right? So you might see from the interactions what files are being interacted with, what sites are having more interactions, what is really happening there. And the reason why this is important is because data security is 100% a continuous effort, right? It goes through, you're observing, you're improving your process here, and being able to just understand it. It's not a one-time process. You won't be able to identify this. The landscape that we're in now with AI, with data security, with all the different assets is constantly moving. And it's something that we're really trying as part of our push, even with all of our customers and all the conversations that we're having, to really hone in on the fact that this is not it's not a one-time event. It's not a one-time fix. It's a constant effort. And so moving forward, it's really the fact comes down to that, the organizations that are working as part of this, building an AI, you have your data sensitivity, you're trying to make sure that you're not putting too much in it, you're taking away productivity, and you're trying to balance all these different aspects of it, right? Being able to see, where your sensitive data exists. We have Activity Explorer, we have Content Explorer, we have different ways of going through Data Explorer, has non-M365 data points in it too. All these different methods and different product sets and different offerings are ways that we're helping you to identify where that data is. And then, based off of the actions, activities, the alerts in your environment, you'll be then able to understand, where do you have coverage, where do you not have coverage, and what those gaps are, right? And that's going to then, of course, if there's any drift in what you've done, what you've created, it's going to help you detect that. And then, of course, if there's a potential for oversharing as well. So with this process, or, in this case, a feedback loop itself, depending on how you want to see it, it's allowing you to have, safer AI adoption, right? Kind of going through that process itself and making sure that, you can kind of go through this and really improve what's happening in your environment and improve your posture, because you're taking a look at what's happening and you're continuously going through and improving it too. And so what I did want to show is our product offering that we've been having. We've had, Data Security Posture Management Classic and Data Security Posture Management for AI Classic. They were in existence already to help with, understanding the the risk posture that you do have in your environment. And so the goal in this, and as you kind of look, closer into, the screen grab that I put in here as well, the insights that you're going to be getting are really based off of what's happening in the environment, right? It's the goal is that this is where you start out in your environment. You have, of course, your data points coming in from information protection or data loss prevention, inside risk management, right? You also have things coming in from your AI, interface. You have, apps that are coming in, agents. You have so many different aspects that are all coming in here. And the goal was that what we had in the DSPM Classic and DSPM for AI Classic, we're combining it here so you get those better insights. The data discovery, you're taking a look, you have these classified or labeled assets. It's giving you, these key posture metrics to help you understand. And then, the objectives are also another way to get better insights. And so if you take a look at some of the different objectives, it's taking what you have in your environment and getting a more of a overall holistic understanding of what's taking place, right? What files are at risk, what was sent where, take, the different actions that you need to kind of go through to take to make sure that everything is fine, right? And then you have the option of taking a look into a remediation plan. And then that remediation plan is going to kind of give you steps on different policies that you need to create to then reduce the risk. And this is not just under, just AI. This is a combination of, your entire data estate, but also with AI coming into place here so that you can have this continuous set of monitoring and be able to see what's taking place in the environment. Take those steps based off of just the analysis that's going on in the back end of what's happening there too, to ensure that you're constantly monitoring the data sets there too. And so the other part that I really wanted to hone in on within the data security posture management portal is the reports itself. So this is something again that we recently announced, and it just went into GA, I believe, last week. What it's really doing is that the reports segments are coming from information protection. You have data loss prevention. They're also working on different, workloads that are coming in that's allowing you to see more of what's going on in your environment. And the reason why this is important is that we're framing it as this is not just a dashboard, but this is more so of a way to have proof of what's happening in the environment. It's not just where you can come in and you can see this. I mean, you definitely can see it, but it's not just we're trying to reframe it so you can see it as a proof of what's happening, what's going well, what's not going well. See the labeling that's taking place, and helping you use this as a proof you need to take the next steps of what needs to be protected or what needs to be, what needs labeling, what's not identified, and kind of spread it across different product sets other than what you're seeing itself. And so an example here that I wanted to point out is on the report side, we jumped into the auto labeling coverage here. Again, we've talked about data classification. We've talked about data, the labeling with protections, and taking the next steps of enforcing it and constantly, going through and making sure that it's something that's taking place in your environment, right? And so in this report, if you take a deeper look into some of the aspects here, you can see, again, this is from our demo environment, so it's most likely almost 100% going to be very different from what you're seeing, and your numbers will be much higher or lower depending on what you have enabled or not enabled in this case, right? But the total items that you have labeled in your environment, and then what was auto labeled, if there's emails, in terms of files and things too, it gives you those high level insights so you can kind of get a feel for what's taking place. And based off of this, you can also understand, what part of this auto labeling, what's actually enforced in the environment, what's in simulation, and what's, what has gone through and not been enforced there too. And the goal here is so that you can get those different insights. You can see, track, what's taking place in your environment as you're going through, you're enabling the, the different segments of your overall scaling, right? Scaling the labeling in your environment, scaling the data classification, so then that can then proceed down into how AI interacts with it too. And then, of course, you can then see across OneDrive, your emails, your endpoints, SharePoint, wherever it is, you can see how this policy coverage has gone through with the different workloads themselves. And so these reports, specifically for information protection and data loss prevention, can be found under the, each individual product, right, within Microsoft Purview. So if you go to information protection, you can see it there. If you see it in DLP as well, they're under posture reports there. But, the goal is that, at the end of the joke is that Microsoft, we love our portals, right? So we're trying to make sure that as you kind of go into this environment, we can put as much information as we can here so you can see the data itself too. Now, really to kind of talk about, taking the big picture of the end-to-end, Purview data security journey. I mentioned it a couple of times here, how you start and the process of it, right? So we have the 5 it's, I guess you could say here. We have the find it, the signal it, the protect it, see it, and then prove it here, right? So when you're finding it, you're classifying that data, right? You're finding where it's located, you're finding what's important. This could be based off of your the requirements that are coming down from your organization to make sure that it's information that is compliant with what you need protected. If you have your own customers, you might have different agreements. So being able to classify that data to understand, hey, this is sensitive, this is not sensitive, this needs protection, all those different things, AI shouldn't interact with it. That's, of course, that first step. Building on top of it then is now you signal it, right? You add in those labels with protections. It could be, this can be only shared with HR, this can be only shared with legal, depending on how you want to configure that. Those labels then, give those instructions that then you can have the system use as part of your protected step. In which case you have now the enforcement policies, right? This is things that you have set up with inside risk management, with the DLP, if you're sharing it. We have, we announced, for Copilot, you can set up DLP with Copilot. You can do that with labels, of course, but you can also now, you can do that with sensitive information types too. So we're trying to build in these capabilities as you're, going through and seeing the process of a way to really help you in those steps, so that as you have those policies already in place, if you've already done data classification, you're still trying to go onto the labeling side, you can create those policies in DLP for Copilot and help as you go forward with the data classification itself and the labeling there too. And then taking from those different steps, of course, the Copilot guardrails that you haven't protected. We are going to go back into the see it that I just kind of showed on the DSPM side. You see those objectives that you have in your environment. You have the metrics that are taking place to give you that holistic view of what's taking place. And then, of course, you have the reporting that's going to give you a great idea of as to what's actually taking place in your environment. What is being successful? What is being implemented? What needs more steps? And kind of things that you can do there when you're seeing it too. And then, of course, based off of what you're seeing, you're going to go through that improving process. You have the recommendations, you have the policy guidance, the remediation plans, which will then take you into the step-by-step guidance of actually creating a DLP policy or inside risk management policy or some sort of protection policy that is specifically geared to your environment based off of these analytics that have been enabled to then allow you to continue fine-tuning your policies, and then, of course, improve your overall data security posture in that case too. So it is a process. Again, it's repeatable, and we're really, trying to figure out the way that, these conversations can be had. And the main point in this case is to really ensure that these steps are taking place to reduce the AI oversharing, right? Because the reason is that AI safety itself is a present-day control problem. Like, if you don't have this, I guess you could say this, overall unified sensitivity foundation, right? You don't have the groundwork already laid out. You're going to have different struggles, and organizations are going to then have the struggle in identifying, how to safely scale AI or Copilot adoption, right? We live in the world of AI now, and AI is going to be around. It's going to be in the environments. It's included in, outside of just us having included in some of our licenses, it's everywhere, right? It's being accessed in so many different ways. And so having that built in is going to help you, do that safely, be able to safely scale AI. And then, of course, if you don't have the unified sensitivity, foundation in this case, you're also having the the fragmented brittle controls that you have to then try to figure out and maybe overcorrect after. So you're having the additional steps that need to be taking place there as well. And so you're also just kind of summarizing this last part here when you're talking about the overall data security posture in your environment, being able to have that confidence that your levels of confidence are high with that, your data security posture itself. That's something that is not a very stable thing when you don't have that unified groundwork already laid out. And so if you don't have this process set up or an understanding of what you're doing with that present day control side, you're having the risk that you have with oversharing. It's constantly growing, right? And then those controls, they become harder to manage, explain, and trust because they're not unified with one another. Or you're going back and you're trying to fix something after there's been some form of a violation or something along those lines. You're really trying to make sure that you're set up for success as you're moving forward and not having to backtrack and fix some of the work that you need to do. And so the real key takeaway is, with the new data landscape that we're in that's constantly changing, is that right now AI is moving much faster than fragmented security models can really keep up with, right? And so if we start with this process, our goal is to help you be able to keep up, be able to adapt fast as things change, because even with this process, you're going to have AI is moving faster than anything in this world right now. And to make that catch up process be a shorter process, having this control problem be addressed is what we're recommending and kind of the next steps that we're going to be hoping to do. And so really taking it up here with talking about the next step to kind of part of the closeout of some of the things that we're recommending here, right? We're presenting this as a way that Microsoft Purview is going to be operationalizing the way that we handle modern data security and AI safety. And really what we're trying to do is you're trying to balance security with productivity, because you don't want to have so much security that productivity is impacted, but you also don't want to have so much productivity that your security is compromised for that matter. So finding that right balance is what we're really trying to go forward with, that shared understanding of that sensitivity that I've mentioned a few times, applying that consistent protection. And then of course, all of this with the goal that you will be adopting AI with confidence, and then your information is going to be kind of part of that process so that you don't have to worry about those next steps. And they're all associated with one another, and getting that scalable process set up is really key at this point to make sure that AI can be adapted in a safe manner. And so with that, that's really my story that I wanted to bring out to everybody here on taking the AI boundaries, right, and how to bring that into the data sensitivity side. We have so much great content out there, and we're now in the process of really redefining that and helping give those resources and tools out to our organizations and customers so they can kind of go with that process. I'm going to take it over into the AMA portion of this session itself. And I know that we have a couple of questions that have been submitted already. And Troy, if you want to go ahead and take over, and then we can kind of have some of those discussions themselves.
Awesome. Thanks, Saracen. That was super helpful. Thank you, everyone. So let's kick off our AMA. Again, if you're watching live and you have any questions for our team, please go to the link shown below to ask us your questions on our tech community blog. You'll have to log in or create an account before you can ask a question. Okay, so it looks like we already have some questions lined up. Saracen, here's the first one.
Okay.
Are you saying that when we use Copilot, that it will allow users to see data that they do not have access to, even if we don't buy more features? We already pay for E3 and Copilot.
So for that one, so the answer is multifaceted. So no, Copilot can't access things that users don't have access to. But what I will caveat it with is that you may have access to something that you don't know that you have access to. And that's where you have, Copilot that can access that, and that's something that may not be something that you've identified in your environment. And so E3 actually has manual processes where you can go through and do labeling, and there's DLP. Things are involved in it that allow you to improve your overall posture itself, right? So when you have the E3 side, you're doing the manual sensitivity labels. You can obviously go through, you can add it there, right? You can have that as part of your environment, and it's then identifying the information. You already have, things within your Content Explorer, and all those already included. You may not have things like trainable classifier that's part of E3, but it is something that you understand if you're able to label it, you identify the information, you can go through that process and have that in your environment. So really, to kind of answer that a little bit more, is the fact that that you as the administrator can see the what's going on in your environment. And with manual labels that can be applied, that is a good step of making sure that Copilot's not accessing something that they should not be accessing. But again, if you have access to it, if you have the permissions to access that, then Copilot will run on your permissions themselves.
Awesome, thank you. This just goes to show that the more data you have labeled, the more data will be protected. So thanks for that, Saracen. We have another question that just came in. How does classification and labeling work at scale? We're talking about hundreds of millions of documents.
Yeah, no. So this is one of the most commonly asked questions that we get, right, on how to really kind of step forward with the labeling at scale, right? So about 2 years ago, we increased our service side labeling limit from it was around 25K to then 100K, and this is files per day per tenant, right? And so this was something that was updated based off of the feedback here. Again, this is a limit that we only have applying to certain locations. Again, this is more so auto labeling at rest, which is SharePoint and OneDrive, and kind of to go through those processes itself. And then of course, simulations are then limited to 4 million files, depending on what it is that you have, right? And so the main feedback that we get based off of this is that there's this limit that you're getting presented with is going to prevent your files from having those protections put into place here, and that you're not going to be able to label. But really, there's so many different layers of labeling that we have and that we're offering that kind of, and I don't want to say bypass, but it does go around this limit of 100K, right? And so we recommend that anytime that you're waiting to not do your labeling, you have a growing backlog that's happening, and it's creating, at that point, a little bit more risk because of that process, right? So the way that you can scale beyond that limit of 100K, there's a couple of different ways that you can do it, right? Of course, you have your default labeling, right? This is a part of your different policies that you can create, right? And it's applying a label to all the new content that's happening in your environment, right? And this could be like an initial coverage that you create. That's something that that may or may not need the user action at that point, right? And so this is something that is for all new items that are taking place in your environment, right? There's no throughput limit that you're having here. It's something that we recommend to do that default labeling that you already have, right? Then you of course have your manual user-based labeling that you can do in your environment, right? It's with the user adoption, how you kind of have the users go through and they do the next steps here, trying to do those automatic or the manual labels that you have there. You can also build on top of that with the client-side auto labeling, right? This kind of goes through based off of what you have based on what you have in your environment. Then you of course have the next step of the default library label that you can go. So anytime there is a file that's uploaded or even updated within that specific SharePoint library, you can have that a label be applied there. And again, it's something that's done in bulk, and then it's going to be applied whenever those files are uploaded in that case. And then of course we have anything that you want to do on the API level. Now I did want to mention that the 100K is something that we offer out of the box as part of our offerings. You can technically go beyond that with APIs, but then you go into a different pay as you go model, and it's something that's not necessarily recommended in the sense that we have so many different options for you to meet those goals there too. So after you have this labeling scale or the labels in your environment, then you just build on top of it with, having DLP and different access controls. And then that will then come back to, what I was talking about earlier on the AI side and being able to safely adopt AI for that matter.
Awesome. We have another question that's kind of related to the last one. What's the best practice to systematically and retrospectively apply sensitive label on vast volumes of SharePoint content that already exists in our repository so that Copilot cannot access it?
Yeah, no, and I think that's very much so related there in this case. Having that default library label is something we 100% recommend to kind of have that set up here so that all those files that if they're updated or uploaded, so if there's any updates there, that can be taking place there as well. That the labels. So I want to kind of take a step back to the default labeling in general, right? There's default labels that you can have when you're creating new things. Having all of those aspects already set up here is going to be just a great process to make sure that when you're kind of going through it's set. Now I know that the question is going back to doing things that are being able to apply things a little bit later too, right? Retrospectively, excuse me. So one of the other things that we do have is, of course, our on-demand classification. And the reason I bring that up is because on-demand classification works in a way that it really depends on where you are with your licensing and where you are with your creation of your sensitive information type, and then when you created a file itself. So when you have on-demand classification, it can go through with some of those stale files in your environment. And stale is typically identified by files that haven't been touched with the new classifiers that you have in the environment. On-demand classification can go through, and as part of the process, identify some of those files and then apply the classification as necessary. And we have a lot of good insights out there of those next steps here and how to really deploy that well as part of your strategy to make sure that those vast volumes of data aren't being overlooked. And last but not least here, I just want to add a little bit more so on the DLP side, right? So the DLP, you have local file shares, you have local, different locations that we have an on-prem functionality that you can go through and create to be able to go and access some of those files as well to add those protections. So we have multiple different ways. Of course, we have the library site, we have the access that can be set up to it, and different layers of labeling that can be set up also to pass those limits that the 100K limit that we have as well. So it's the best practice is to really go through and identify what you're missing, and then have do the on-demand classification there, but also kind of go through and look at the process itself and what you have.
Awesome. All right, next one. For Security Copilot, how does this fit in with Purview? How can we use Security Copilot as an integrated part of redefining the way we have AI in our boundary?
Yeah, no, so it's actually a great question. And the reason I'm saying that is because the way that we have Copilot as the way that our users are going through, they're interacting with AI, right? And in the case of Security Copilot, it's almost a tool for the administrators to make their process of investigating a lot simpler. So I'll give you an example. So on the data loss prevention side, we have an embedded experience with the Activity Explorer, where you can use Security Copilot. It's a drop down on your right that you can interact with to help you investigate, see some of the activities that are taking place in your environment, and take actions. So the way that this could be taking place as part of the overall boundary is that it's going to help you as part of your continuous improvement and monitoring phase, because it's a tool that we're recommending for our administrators to use at this time. So not just with Security Copilot in Activity Explorer, but you also have it, embedded within, inside of risk management. You have it in communication compliance, e-discovery, in different places where you can go through, and it's going to help you with the overall investigative process itself. So really, it comes back down to going through this process. You have your classification, you have your labeling, you have your enforcement of protection, and you go through the continuous monitoring, and then Security Copilot will come in as a way to make that continuous cycle a lot simpler on the administrator side.
Awesome. Does Purview protect data beyond Microsoft 365, Saracen?
Yes, yes, it does. And so we have a couple of different ways that we're doing it, right? So we have, of course, the way that we can take a look at it with, third parties, right? So we have S3 buckets that we can do as part of our, data governance side. But M365 also, beyond it, we do with like SQL databases and Azure data too. So it's not just, third parties or, other companies that we're working with, but we're also trying to do it outside of just M365 within our content itself. And then we also, we have different ways that we can build on it with things that aren't supported. But yes, it does.
Okay, and on top of that, does information protection support developers and custom apps?
Yes, yeah, it does. We actually have a lot of work that we have been doing. We have our SDK that we can use, and that's what we've been recommending to our developers to kind of use and to kind of get a understanding of what's happening in the environment too. But yes, it's a you can deploy it, and you'll be able to do a little bit more, and it's going to be supporting things outside of just M365 and a part of your custom apps as well.
Awesome. Okay, we had another question come in. Why are you saying manual labels with E3 versus what you're stating is automatic labeling versus default labeling? How do we know what we already pay for versus what's available through other products?
Yep. So not sure about the other product segment here, but for the manual side, it's what I mean by that is on the user side. So the users can go through, they can manually apply those labels. Automatic labeling, I'm also applying it to the service side where the service is going to go through and automatically label the data that you have. So if it finds the information, it'll automatically apply the label. But when you go through, there's a little bit more of an onus on a user so that the user can go through and apply those labels so that you're going through the process of making sure that the data that's being handled is already being labeled and you're going through it because it is something that can be used as condition in DLP as well. So really the main difference between E3 and E5 is the automatic functionality that you can set up, but the labeling protections, the labeling that you have available to be applied, that's already available there too. So really, it's just the differentiator is what's not going to be automatically applied there.
Awesome, thanks. I believe that's all of the questions we got today.
Mhm.
Thank you all so much, and thank you, Saracen. So this wraps up our ANA today on defining AI boundaries with data sensitivity in Microsoft Purview. If you're still watching live and would like to rewatch any portion of this AMA, this will be available on demand the moment we end this live stream. You can visit the link below to rewatch. And if you're watching this on demand and you have a question, but we're not able to join the session live, please post it on Microsoft Tech Community event page. Our team will continue watching the comments section and answer questions over the next few days. And Saracen, if you don't mind, yes, thank you. We also added some resources here that you might find helpful. The first QR code here will take you to our Secure by Default Blueprint, which is a structured framework designed to protect data by applying baseline sensitivity labels, such as what Saracen mentioned earlier, default library settings and access controls almost immediately. And the second QR code will take you to an article about using Purview to manage data security for Microsoft 365 Copilot and also get recommendations to manage AI interactions. Thanks again, Saracen, for the helpful section today. And thank you all for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Catch you all soon.